Woods and Waters with your host, Bud Leavitt.
Will a black bear ever attack a human being? Well, don't tell me that he won't. My program guest is Jeff Wright. You may remember the story of a bear attacking a man earlier this year down in a place called Alexander. Jeff Wright runs sporting camps at Poker Moonshine Lake. And one day he went out in the woods and there was a bear story that followed. But before we tell you the bear story, I want to talk just a bit about his recent hunting trip. You went elk hunting. Tell me about that experience.
Well, we hunted in eastern Oregon. I flew to Medford, Oregon, which is where I worked and lived back 10 and 11 years ago. And I went out to visit friends that I worked with, and we went elk hunting. We drove from Medford to Ukiah Unit, which is south of Pendleton in near the Blue Mountains. And we camped out and we hunted in the John Day wilderness area. And we hunted about 3 or 4 miles in from where we camped. And in a 5-day hunt, well, we really only hunted 4 days. 3 of us got elk, all spikes.
You're really up in the high country?
No, not really, only about 6,000 feet.
How many did you see, Jeff?
Oh, hundreds.
Did you?
Yeah, there's a lot of game in that area.
Did you find the bull that you wanted at any time?
No, I never saw a bull
Really?
in 4 days. One I thought might have been a bull by color and size, but it was just a quick, fleeting glimpse of them, so I never saw any horns.
Had you done elk hunting in earlier days?
Yeah, back when I lived there, I hunted 2 years in a row for elk in that same, not the same area, but not far from there, 40 or 50 miles
Tell
from
me
there.
about elk hunting. How difficult is it?
A lot of footwork, a lot of steep country, and while the first day of the season, it's usually you just pick a stand and sit, and the elk start moving around, and then once the first shots go off, it's a lot like deer hunting in a more populated area, where the deer and the elk get scared and they start running all around. But then after that first morning, then you have to go hunt them up. And you have to go down in the bottoms of these canyons where it's real thick growth and just stalk along real slow and easily, and hopefully you'll spot them before they spot you.
Were you glassing them? Were you glassing them?
No, it's pretty thick country. It's on the south sides of the hills, it's open pine ridges, and that's where they come to feed at night and morning and evening. But during the day, after the season's open, it's in thick country, real thick lodgepole thickets and Doug fir thickets.
Did you hear any of the bulls bugling?
No, that was all done. That goes
was
on.
over.
Yep, that's in September.
That's a great animal, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's the finest game animal that lives, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
I don't know, just the coloration of them and the big regal set of horns. I especially like just the country that they live in. The western larches during elk season out there are all in fire, you know, in the height of their color. And it's just it's a nice place, eastern Oregon. I've been to Montana and Colorado and Idaho. I've never hunted in those spots, but there's just something about that eastern Oregon that I really like.
What about the fishing in those rivers?
Oh, it's quite good. The John Day River and the other feeder streams into the John Day.
Have you done any steelhead fishing out there?
No, not there. But they keep telling me, come out and steelhead fish, but I never have yet.
That's a great area for big steelhead, big steelhead. I have a friend from Portland, and he's an ardent steelhead fisherman, and he comes east every year for Atlantic salmon fishing, but he vows that the best day the Atlantic salmon ever swam will never match a 20-pound steelhead. They're really, really great supporters of steelhead fishing. But I'm surprised you haven't fished them.
Well, one time, I had one on one time. I went down to this pretty good sized stream one day. This is when I was cutting timber out there. And I just popped the Royal Coachman out on the surface and a fish took it. And next thing I knew, I was down to backing.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure that's what it was. It wasn't a tremendous fish. It was probably 10 or 12 pounds.
Heavy river, heavy water?
Yeah, it was in the North Umpqua. There was no way I could chase him. It was all boulders alongside, so I just closed up on the reel and broke it off at the leader. I didn't want to lose backing and line and everything.
You're a real Westerner. How come you came east?
Well, I'm from New Jersey. I went out there.
We won't hold that against you.
I went out there just as an adventure. I always wanted to. There was 3 things that I always wanted to do in life, and one was be a lumberjack, so I figured I might as well do it in Oregon, and work on a commercial fishing boat, which I've done that in Alaska and in New Jersey, Long Island, off of Montauk Point, both commercial and charter fishing. And the third thing, I always wanted to be a cowboy, and I haven't done that yet. Maybe when I'm semi-retired, I'll buy a ranch, and then I can be a cowboy.
Really? Those were your goals earlier in life?
Yeah.
Really? Why a cowboy?
I don't know.
You fascinated by horses? Or?
Well, not particularly, just their lifestyle, I guess, just up in the mountains or in the open grassland and following the cattle around and camping wherever night takes you. I always thought it would be pretty interesting. I'd probably get sick of it after a month or 2. But.
Now, you camped on the elk hunt.
Yeah.
Now, what were the conditions? What were weather conditions?
Oh, when we first set up camp, it wasn't too bad. It was in the 40s and real breezy. But after we got camp set up, the temperature in the next couple of days went down. It was probably down around 10 at the lowest. We got 4 or 5 inches of snow the one day. Where camp was higher than where we were hunting. Where we were hunting, there was almost no snow, but at camp there was 4 or 5 inches.
Huh.
And we have it's a pretty elaborate camp we set up, an old canvas army tent with a wood stove in it. And we set up a kitchen, and one problem with the camp, we didn't have water close by. We had to drive about 4 miles to get good water.
Tell me about your commercial fishing experiences that took you to Alaska.
Well, while I was in college, I went up there.
Where'd you go to college?
Ramapo College of New Jersey.
Oh, yeah.
I studied botany and ecology. Well, one summer, really I took off in the middle of a semester, and I went up there. I said I had enough of school, I'm going to Alaska. So I went up there with a couple of friends and just really were sightseeing and just checking out the whole place. And I was standing on a dock one day, and a fellow pulls up in his boat, and he says, "You get seasick?" I said, "No." He said, "You want to fish for a week or 2?" Well, I said, "Sure." What had happened, his regular first mate, it was just a small operation, 2-man operation, his first mate got sick, or I'm not sure what the story was, but he needed someone for a couple of weeks. And it was a small longliner, and we'd go in and out every day and leave dock about 2 in the morning. Well, up there it's light all the time anyway, or just almost all the time. We'd go out and set our long lines. We had 10 of them, each of them about 1,200 feet long. And by the time we got the last one set, time to pull in the first one. And we had a little power winch for pulling in the lines. And it was mostly for halibut and lingcod. We'd catch red snapper and other fish.
Now, what part of Alaska were you in?
That was down in the Kenai Peninsula.
The Kenai Peninsula?
Yeah, in the town of Seward.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You must have come out of Soldotna?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. I caught my biggest king right there in the Kenai, right there. Got him on a fly, too.
Is that right?
That's right. Very unusual. But anyway, how big were the halibut?
The biggest one we caught was about 250.
A lot of big halibut up there.
It's amazing. Filleting one of those.
I went halibut fishing one day up there in the bay because it was so windy we couldn't fish for kings, for silvers rather. The silvers were in at the time. And I said, look, the last thing I want to do is handline halibut. Well, first one I got weighed 60 pounds. And we got 18 halibut off one rock, the place they call Halibut Ledge. But it was spectacular. But there were a group of Texans fishing in another boat, and they really brought them in. And you know, they wouldn't put them on board because of the strength of the fish. They put I don't know how you fellas did it, but they put a half hitch on them and towed them in that night. That's the way they brought was that what you fellas were doing?
No, the captain shot him with a 44 before he'd bring him on board.
Yeah, before you.
Yeah.
They'll slap that tail, they tell me, and just put a hole in the boat, and you sink right there.
Powerful fish.
They sure are. All right, what did your parents think about all this foolishness? Leaving school, go out west?
Well, they always thought I was a little crazy, I guess.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, when you were in Montauk, you were in commercial fishery there too. What did you do off Montauk?
Giant tuna.
Off giant tuna?
Yeah.
Were you a mate?
Yeah, I was a mate on a charter boat, and when we didn't have charter customers, we just go out commercial fishing, hook and line. It's the hardest work I've ever done, reeling in one of those fish.
Oh, yes. What was the biggest one you landed?
The biggest one was 870. That's not the biggest one I reeled. The biggest one I reeled, I guess, was 557. But I helped catch a lot in the 600, 700, 800 pound range. We fought one night. We hooked them just before dark, about 5 o'clock.
On rod and reel?
Yeah, and we fought them over 12 hours. We fought them all night until sometime, after 5 the next morning, and then we finally lost them.
Did you get him up at any time?
At one time when it was dark, so we really couldn't see how big he was.
Fish.
But it must have been a 13 or 1,400 pound fish. It was a real big fish.
Who was the angler at the time? Do you recall?
No, I don't remember.
How did he stand it physically?
We went back and forth. He said, well, forget the record if we land it. We'll just, everybody fight it. It was tough fight.
That is a tough fight.
Yeah.
What weight line was it?
We're using 130.
130, 130 pound test.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever have you down to the backing?
No, see, it was on a small boat, so you could really run parallel with them.
You're
to
backing
keep up
down
with
on
them.
him also.
No, we really didn't back down. We'd run forward because it was a small boat, and we could just run parallel with them and catch up with them that way. Once the fight was almost over and the fish was straight down, then we'd back. But
when you lost him at 5 the next morning, was there enough daylight to see him at the time?
No, he was straight down.
Straight down.
When we finally lost him.
Hook tore out, apparently.
Yeah. No, the line broke.
Really?
Yeah.
Wore the line off.
Yeah. Line broke on that one.
You weren't foul hooked at any time?
No.
Pick up a ledge or anything like that?
No. As far as we know, no.
Must have been a tired crew that came in that day.
Yeah. We were almost out of fuel, too. It was running all night.
Yeah. Did you ever fish off Block Island?
Yep. That was right in the grounds where we were fishing.
Really?
Yeah.
Between Montauk and Block Island?
Mm-hmm.
Boy, I got my biggest bluefish off Block Island.
Yeah.
Spectacular place to catch bluefish in the fall of the year.
Oh, that whole area is amazing. Like I was saying, I grew up in New Jersey, and inshore fishing there was okay. I grew up catching stripers and bluefish and fluke. But when I went out to Montauk, I just couldn't believe it's only 100 miles away, but the fishing was so much better.
Where'd you fish out in New Jersey, Braille?
Well, my grandparents were in Point Pleasant, so that's mostly fished there. And I worked on a charter boat out of Barnegat Light for a couple of summers, too, while I was in school. And then even after I got back from Oregon, I worked there one summer.
It's hard work, isn't it?
Yeah. It's good, clean work, though.
It sure is good, clean work, but it's hard work.
Yep.
Mating on one of those is a real effort.
Yeah, long hours.
With all that training, except being a cowboy yet, how come you let a little 150-pound bear work you over? Tell us about that experience. This was page 1 news all over America. Associated Press picked it up. What happened? Give us the details from that morning until it happened.
Well, I was out in my circle of baits. I tend 10 bear baits for hunters that I have come and stay at the lodge. This year I had 4 hunters coming, so I figured 10 baits was give me enough leeway in case some of the baits went bad. The bears would quit hitting the bait for some reason. So I was on the last bait of the day, and it was about noontime, and the wind was blowing hard. A front had come through that night. Well, I parked my truck, and I slammed the truck door, dropped the tailgate just like I always do, and always make a lot of noise. I try to condition the bears to when I'm coming, and excuse me, and just to let them know I'm coming if there is a bear at the bait. But because the wind was blowing so hard, he evidently never heard me. So I went in the truck and got my bait and went into this bait site. Now this bait,
How far, let me interrupt you. How far was the truck from where the bait was, approximately?
about 75 yards or so.
So we could have heard the slamming of the door and the deck when you brought that down. And,
I would, except for the wind conditions.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So I went in to check the bait, and it's in a real thick area. It's a grown over, clear cut area. And when I went in there, I looked, and well, the way I bait is I put the bait on the ground and then cover it with half a 55-gallon drum, and then put rocks on top of the drum. So the only thing big enough to get the bait is a bear. So I went in there, and as soon as I get close enough to see the bait, I start looking for it, just to see if it's been hit. When I got there, the drum was turned over. It looked like the drum was turned over. I saw this round black shape. So I looked a little harder, and I realized it was a bear and not the bait can. So as soon as I saw him, just out of instinct, I shouted at him, "Hey," as loud as I could, just to chase him away. And as soon as I did that, he just came for me. In about 2 leaps, he was on me and knocked me down and started biting me.
You were unarmed?
Unarmed, and the main reason I'm unarmed on that bait, well, if I have a bait that's actively being hit and I think there's a sow and cubs there, then I usually carry a gun with me just to be on the safe side, just in case I get between the sow and the cubs. But this bait had never even been hit before. It was a relatively new bait site, only about 1.5 weeks, 2 weeks old. It had never been hit before. It was noontime. Never expected to see a bear there.
Middle of the day.
Yep. And I don't carry my revolver with me because to comply with game laws, you can't carry a loaded gun in a vehicle unless you have a concealed weapons permit, which I just never got around to applying for. So rather than unloading and reloading and unloading and reloading every time you get in and out of the truck, the only time I carry it is when, you know, I think there might be a sow and cubs around, or it's real wet conditions where you can't help but be quiet. And, well, after he knocked me down, well, I received a bite to my stomach and the back of my leg and my shoulder. And as I was laying there fighting him off, well, I wasn't looking at him. My head was turned the other way, but I know my hands were punching or doing something at any rate. And I received this bite to my thumb.
Look at these, will you?
It was about 8 stitches. And
Didn't affect the movement of the thumb or anything?
no, that was the first thing the doctor checked, is this cut across the top of the thumb. The tendon that brings the thumb back runs right across the top of the thumb. And it was a deep cut, and he was surprised that it didn't sever it.
In what position were you? You're lying down, but was the bear over you when he had this thumb in his mouth,
Yeah, he was over me. No, he was just biting everywhere he could, and as soon as I felt that bite, I felt that was I felt pain on that one. The other ones I didn't feel. As soon as I felt that, I just covered up my face and rolled over on my side and played dead. I just remembered that's what you're supposed to do when you're getting attacked by the bear. It never even occurred to me until then. And as soon as I did that, he just nosed me around a little bit and pawed me a little bit, moved me. And then I could remember his nose was right up on my ear, and I could feel him breathing in my ear. And he made a couple of woofing sounds, and then he took a nip at my head, just like that. And he didn't break the skin, but he bruised my scalp a little bit, and he ran off. The whole thing only probably took 10 seconds. No, maybe 15, I don't know. It wasn't very long.
With spare from Jeff undressing, but he has claw marks here, and up on the shoulder, under the shirt. Had you been conditioned all your life that a bear will run from you and never attack a human?
Well, black bear, that's what I've always heard.
Yeah, I mean, talking black bear, Maine bear, right?
When I was in Alberta in 1975, I had a fairly close encounter with a grizzly bear.
Well, that is something else.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Well, my friends and I were we were at a campsite and we saw this mountain up here that we wanted to get to. So we just took a compass heading and started heading through the woods to get there. We got to a certain point and there was a big old beaver pond there. And the easiest way to get around it was there was all these windfall poplars. When the beavers were in there, they had flooded them and the poplars died. And then when they fell, they were all crosshatched. So the easiest way to get through this area is to walk along the poplars, one to the other, and sometimes we were 4, 5, 6 feet off the ground. So I'm walking along, paying attention to my footing, and all of a sudden I look up, and there's a grizzly standing there on his hind feet looking at us. He had just gotten up out of his bed. And, well, we went one way, and he went the other. And I think probably, well, I hear that there's a 50% chance of an attack when you surprise a grizzly like that. But what might have saved us is our feet were 6 feet off the ground, so that put our heads at 12 feet off the ground. I probably looked like a larger bear than he was, so he decided to take off rather than fight.
You were probably just about eye level to that thing standing up ahead of you.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing more awesome than the appearance of a grizzly. I've seen them up in Alaska and so forth at the Brooks Range, and unbelievable, just unbelievable. And the word awesome, it does apply in the case of one of those. But nothing even remotely close to this. I mean, now all the black bear that you may have baited this year.
As soon as they hear a twig snap or anything out of the ordinary, they're gone.
What do you think moved this bear to come at you?
Well, the only thing I can figure is I just totally scared him. He had just gotten to the bait, evidently, because he was just hitting the goodies that were up on top of the bait can. And he was paying attention to the bait, and the wind was blowing, and when he heard my voice, it just scared him, is what I think. Scared him so much that he figured he better, you know, temporary insanity, I don't know. Or maybe he was trying to protect his newfound bait, newfound food.
Did he ever come back to that bait?
He did, but never regularly. We didn't, after it happened, we didn't go back and check that bait for another 2 days. And then when we went back there wasn't a scrap of food left. He'd cleaned up everything. Well, to go back for a second, after the attack, after he left, I went back to my truck and got my pistol and went back into that spot just to finish my work, to check the bait. And
meantime, you're bleeding at the thumb and so forth?
I wrapped myself up in a bandana. It wasn't bleeding bad. And I guess the reason I did that was I guess that was just my way of coping with the whole thing. Just, okay, business as usual, nothing happened. I'll be okay.
What does a man tell his wife when he goes back to camp and she's looking at his scratch in his stomach, shoulder, and all the way up, and one part of his hand is bleeding? How do you tell your wife you've been attacked by a bear?
Well, it was on a Saturday, and on Saturdays are the days that all the cabins change hands. And so it's cleaning day and laundry day, so she was busy all around camp. So I just walked in with an armful of firewood and threw a couple pieces of firewood on the fire. And I said, I hate to interrupt a smooth running Saturday, but I need to go to the hospital. What happened? I said, well, a bear got me. And I think she thought I was kidding at first because I walked in like nothing had happened. But then...
Have there been any doubters to this story of yours?
No, not to my knowledge.
Really? I mean, but it's so unusual in Maine to have a bear in the woods. We're not talking about a penned-up bear, attack a human being, because, you know, for years we've been going with the notion that a bear won't attack you. He'll go first if he sees you. And you've taken care of that myth.
Well, that's what I always thought. Well, when I first talked with the game warden about it, his first question was it injured? Because he knows I guide hunters. He thought maybe I was in the woods looking for a wounded bear that one of my hunters shot. But I said, no, it was just a fluky thing. He was at the bait. I walked up there, and he grabbed a hold of me.
Well, you know, the life of a cowboy would be quite simple after this. You ever going to realize your goal of being a cowboy?
I hope so.
Do you?
Someday.
I want to ask, and we only have a couple of minutes. You've taken over the camps that Gene Moriarty used at one time at Poker Moonshine. A lovely spot in Washington County, famous for bass fishing and all of that. But I noticed via folder you're devoting considerable attention to ecology, nature trails, and you're kind of turned it around as no longer just hunting and fishing.
Right. Well,
is that from your college training?
Well, probably initially from my father's training. Ever since I was just a young boy, he would take me out in the woods and teach me the trees and different kinds of rocks. And he started me off fishing real young. But when I was in college, I studied botany and ecology. And it's always really been my main interest. In fact, I even quit hunting for a couple years while I was in college.
Did you?
Yeah, but I took it back up again. And I would like to make that the main part of the business.
That's
the
interesting.
Nature hikes and wildlife photography. There's a lot of eagles near us and a lot of moose that come pretty readily to the call. And well, I think there's a lot more people in this country now that are more environmentally in tune, or want to be, or want to learn about the woods and nature.
That's good. I'm glad to hear you say that. What are your guests saying about this?
Well, so far I haven't had too many people that are really interested in nature hikes or wildlife photography, although I have a few. People that have been coming for years are avid bird watchers and photographers.
Poker Moonshine's an interesting lake, isn't it?
Oh, it sure is.
Learning a lot about it each year, and every year you're there?
Yeah.
That's great. You had a good fishing year, you told me.
Yeah, it was an excellent year for fishing this year.
Jeff Wright has been my guest, and he's the man who was attacked by a bear, and a man with 3 goals in life. He's not realized one, he wants to be a cowboy. But at the moment, his residence is Poker Moonshine Lake, Alexander, Maine, and good night, everyone.
Dances in the sun, so joyously it calls to me, come join